truly a historic time in Zimbabwe and a pivotal moment in the United States' bilateral relationship with Zimbabwe. For decades, Congress has played a key role in the U.S.-Zimbabwe bilateral relationship, most notably through the Zimbabwe Democracy and Recovery Act, or ZDERA, passed in 2001, which aimed to address persistent human rights violations and governance challenges by prohibiting U.S. support for multilateral and bilateral debt relief and credit for Zimbabwe's government. Much of the world, including the people of Zimbabwe, were optimistic last month after President Mugabe was ousted from power, closing nearly 40 years of authoritarian rule. It is the hope of many, including myself, the transition from President Mugabe to President Emmerson Mnangagwa has represented a renewed opportunity for democracy, transparency, and accountability for the government and, most importantly, for all the people of Zimbabwe. However, I'm concerned that despite the promises made by President Mnangagwa to rooting out corruption, to having free and fair elections, and to overseeing an inclusive government, there is simply not yet enough proof that this regime will be any different than the one before. We know that President Mnangagwa has announced a cabinet stacked with former close associates and military officials. In addition to them being involved in past atrocities, many cabinet members also have serious corruption allegations against them. This raises questions about the government's commitment to a new, democratic, renewed path forward in Zimbabwe. And although President Mnangagwa promised an inclusive and representative democracy for all Zimbabweans, the opposition remains left out of the government, seeing an ominous sign about the prospect for real change for the country. The new government of Zimbabwe and the international community must address the yet unanswered calls for justice and accountability for the victims of past horrific atrocities reportedly committed by members of the now new government, perpetrators of the brutal cleansing of political opposition in Matabeleland region in the 1980s, in which 20,000 people were killed, still have not been held accountable after all of these years. Thousands of Zimbabweans still live with the physical and psychological wounds of this violence. As we examine the future of Zimbabwe, one benchmark on the horizon is this August's elections. Free, fair, and credible elections that are transparent, free from intimidation, and in which the opposition is allowed to organize, campaign, and safely run their candidates must be the signal the U.S. and the international community needs to lift some of the barriers to bilateral and mutual aid. This benchmark may in fact determine whether Zimbabwe is ready to capitalize on this historic moment. I thank our witnesses for being here, and again, as Chairman Flake said, you all have crisscrossed the globes, changed travel plans to be here to provide your very thoughtful, insightful testimony. I am grateful for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Booker. Senator Coons, would you like to say something? Senator Coons and I traveled to Zimbabwe almost 2 years ago.
Thank you, Chairman Flake, Ranking Member Booker. I will never forget our memorable afternoon tea with former President Mugabe. And I think many have waited and wondered when the day would come when Zimbabwe would have new leadership. As the Chair and Ranking have framed, I think, very well, the question now is, what will the new government of Zimbabwe do? Will they take the steps needed in order to earn the trust of the world community? Can we find ways to support movement towards real democracy and a truly open society or not? I'm very eager to hear from our panel of two panels of witnesses today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for a chance to participate in the hearing.